What if I told you that Ferrari could have condemned his 2025 season for a design error that neither Hamilton nor Leclerc can hide? What Vasseur discovered in Hungary is so serious that the foundations of the SF-25, and perhaps the future of the team, has trembled. Hungary has always been a route where technical deficiencies are amplified, a circuit that acts as a magnifying glass for any concept defect in a car. The narrow asphalt, the linked curves, and the almost non-existent main straight require a perfect balance between aerodynamic load and traction, and it is precisely where the SF-25 began to show worrying symptoms. After the race, Vasseur requested a detailed analysis of the Hamilton car, not only in the usual tire wear or engine telemetry, but in an exhaustive disassembly of its structure. What he found was much more serious than any member of the team expected. A critical weakness in the rear suspension that was not a timely failure, but a vice of origin in the design. This defect was manifested in the form of progressive loss of adhesion as the temperature of the rear tires increased, generating oscillations in the axis that forced the pilots to constantly modify their trace to avoid the total loss of control. At the aerodynamic level, the data collected in the wind tunnel and in the CFD simulations did not coincide with the real behavior on the track, an unequivocal sign that the correlation between theory and practice was broken. To aggravate the situation, indications were detected that the internal cooling system was not optimizing the thermal flow towards the rear brakes, causing that in certain phases of the race the temperature peaks that altered the pressure of the tires were generated and, with it, the consistency of the rhythm. This finding was a direct blow to the trust that Ferrari had deposited in the SF-25. Not only because the team had already invested its most important letter in the field of suspension with the great update introduced in Belgium, but because the defect could not be corrected with simple settings settled between sessions. It was a problem rooted in the architecture of the car, with ramifications and other interdependent systems, which implied that each attempt of correction could negatively affect other sections of performance. Vasseur understood at that time that the battle for the championship was not only going to fight against McLaren and Red Bull, but against the SF-25 DNA itself. This discovery, more than a technical alert, became a matter of identity for Ferrari. Continue to defend a design concept that promised end speed and aerodynamic efficiency at the expense of mechanical stability, or break the plan and assume drastic changes in the middle of the season. The decision would have not only sports implications, but strategic and political within Maranello, because it meant that the great 2025 project could be injured in death before reaching the middle of the calendar. The classification in Hungary had lit a spark of hope. Charles Leclerc, with an impeccable lap, managed to snatch the pole from rivals with theoretically more balanced cars, suggesting that Ferrari could be about to give a strategic blow in the fight for the championship. During the first 40 laps, the plan seemed to be executed perfectly. Clean outputs, intelligent traffic management, degradation control, and a rhythm that kept both McLaren at bay. The SF-25 in that first section seemed to respond docilely to each wheel entrance of Monegasco. But the illusion collapsed in a matter of minutes after the last stop in boxes. What happened later was a technical collapse that left perplexed even the most experienced engineers of the Ferrari wall. From a 2-second advantage over Oscar Piastri, Leclerc went on to yield more than 40 at the finish line. In the last stint, his rhythm fell dramatically, 1.5 seconds slower by return than the Australian, and the most alarming, slower than at the beginning of the race when the car carried 75 kilos of fuel. The loss of performance did not obey a simple pilot error or a change of conditions on the track. It was a symptom of a technical problem that had already given signs of life in other calendar quotes. The origin of the collapse was traced to one of the most feared problems by any Formula One team: excessive wear of the table or plank wear. This piece, located at the flat bottom, is crucial to maintain the legality of the car in terms of minimum height with respect to the ground. If you wear beyond the limit, it implies an automatic disqualification. Ferrari, remembering Hamilton's precedent in China, opted for an emergency measure: increase the height of the car and the pressure of the full stint tires. That decision, although it avoided the regulatory risk, completely destroyed the aerodynamic balance of the SF-25, reducing the load in curve and causing overheating in the compounds. The official explanation spoke of a problem related to the chassis, but within the paddock the most widespread version was another. George Russell presented it frankly: Ferrari was rolling too low to gain time in curve, and in the last stint he had no choice but to raise the height and sacrifice performance to avoid sanctions. That adjustment broke the harmony between suspension, diffuser, and the rear aerodynamic package, leaving Leclerc without weapons to defend. Beyond the sporting coup, the episode revealed a strategic crack of great draft. Ferrari was trapped in a dilemma: squeeze its performance to the maximum with the extreme configuration that gave speed in classification and in the first stints, or be conservative to avoid regulatory problems, accepting a rhythm deficit against McLaren and Red Bull. Hungary showed that, for the moment, the Scuderia has not found an intermediate point, and that any decision in that sense can mean the difference between fighting for victory or being relegated outside the podium in just a few laps. For Lewis Hamilton, the Hungary Grand Prix was not simply a bad result in the timesheet. It was a frontal clash with the deepest limitations of the SF-25 project. He arrived with a mixture of confidence and urgency, backed by flashes of competitiveness in previous careers and convinced that, with the experience accumulated in his first exits with Ferrari, he could begin to mold the car in his style. However, the weekend taught him that adaptation would not be a matter of weeks, but to face a technical battle that would even test his veteran and mental resistance. From free training, Hamilton perceived erratic behavior on the rear axle, a lack of predictability in the traction that prevented him from attacking the rapid curves with the confidence that characterizes him. The adjustments that he tried with his track engineer did not solve the problem. In each long batch, the wear of the rear tires shot and the internal temperature became uncontrollable, forcing to manage the rhythm long before planned. Frustration grew when it understood that it was not a circumstantial failure to be tied, but a direct consequence of the structural defect that Vasseur had uncovered. In the race, the situation worsened. Hamilton tried to compensate for instability with changes in his piloting style, modifying braking points and softening curve entries to preserve the grip, but each adjustment reduced its attack capacity. The sensations were clear. The car asked him to pilot the defensive, something that clashed frontally with the aggressive mentality with which he had built his record. Each lap became a containment exercise, more focused on avoiding errors than in seeking overtaking or cutting differences. Sources close to the team point out that, after getting out of the car, Hamilton maintained a direct conversation with Vasseur and the technical department. It was not an impulsive complaint, but a meticulous exhibition of the problems lived on the track and the modifications that, according to their experience, were essential for SF-25 to be competitive in any condition. Their demands not only included changes in the rear suspension, but also a review of the aerodynamic flow and the cooling system, aware that each of these areas was interconnected. The psychological impact was evident. Hamilton had arrived in Ferrari as the great signing that could return the Scuderia to the top, but Hungary showed him that the challenge was much deeper than he imagined. The initial chemistry with the team is still present, but now it is mixed with an emergency sensation. Each race that passes without a real solution is a lost opportunity in front of a dominant McLaren and a Red Bull that wobbles in the middle zone of the table. If the SF-25 does not respond soon, the risk is double. An increasingly frustrated Hamilton and a Leclerc that, although fast, could begin to doubt the viability of the project. Vasseur's revelation in Hungary is not simply an isolated technical warning, but a sign that Ferrari is at a crossroads that will define the course of its entire 2025 season. In Formula One, an error of concept in the initial design is not corrected with a change of adjustment or a lower update. It implies rethink it will arrive with the car of the following year. But in this case, Ferrari cannot afford to wait at 2026. The internal and external pressure is too high, and each lost point closer to McLaren and Red Bull to leave them without real championship options before reaching the final phase of the calendar. The team now faces a strategic dilemma that goes beyond sports. On the one hand, there is the conservative option: mitigate the rear suspension defect and its collateral effects through configuration settings and small structural reinforcements, accepting a performance deficit on certain clues, but avoiding the risks of introducing radical changes in full season. On the other, there is the aggressive route: introduce deep modifications that alter the DNA of the SF-25, with the risk of further destabilizing the package and compromising reliability, but with the possibility of returning the car to the direct struggle for victories. This debate is not limited to the technical department. In Maranello, the decisions of this caliber involve senior management, those responsible for sports strategy, and even Ferrari's corporate dome. There are cross-interests: the prestige of having signed Hamilton as a symbol of a new cycle, the contract and motivation of Leclerc, the pressure of the sponsor who hoped to see the team at the top, and, above all, the public image of Ferrari as a historical team that must be competitive in any circumstance. In the paddock, Hungary is already commented as a possible turning point. If Ferrari manages to implement an effective solution in the next careers, he could transform this crisis into a narrative of technical and mental improvement, reinforcing internal trust and sending a blunt message to his rivals.